Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum, and I'm here today at Morphy's with a pair of German occupation production Browning high-power pistols. These are a particularly collectible, desirable subcategory of Browning high-power. I think there are a lot more of them out there than a lot of people maybe realize, and there's a wide variety of variations of them because they were in production almost throughout the entire war. So what we're going to do today is start at the very beginning and go all the way through the very bitter end of German high-power production. Now, I should say, none of these were actually manufactured by Germans. They were manufactured by Belgians under German command. So the Belgians, of course, had adopted the GP35, the Grande Puissance, the high-power pistol in 1935. They were in production for the Belgian army when World War II broke out. And the Belgian army had a big, they had all the bells and whistles on these things. They had 500-meter tangent rear sights, shoulder stocks, belt rigs, the whole everything, the whole enchilada. In fact, I have a previous video covering an original pre-war Belgian army rig of a GP35 high power. So I'll link to that in the description text below. The Germans, of course, invade Belgium on May 28th, 1940. The Belgian government surrenders, and the Germans will spend the next, well, the last couple of days of May, and all of June essentially rounding up Belgian arms and moving them to the Liège citadel for safekeeping, for control. There were a number of Belgian small arms that the German military was quite happy to put directly into its own service, and the high-power pistol is one of them. In German service, this was Pistol 640B, B for Belgian. And from the very beginning, you will get captured Belgian pistols that are reissued out to German units. And let's mention right off the bat here that these were used kind of by anybody and everybody in the German military. They weren't specifically issued to any particular unit or service or branch or anything. There's some ideas out there that the high powers only went to the Luftwaffe. That's really not true. The Luftwaffe certainly did get a bunch of them, but there was no fixed plan of these pistols go to that organization. The German military captured a lot of different foreign weapons from all over Europe and was basically happy to just use them wherever they were convenient. High powers are chambered for 9mm parabellum. They use the exact same ammunition as the German standard issue Lugers and later P38s. So what the heck, just wherever we need them, wherever they're convenient, we'll use them. Now, one of the things that makes the high power a bit unusual is that once the Germans took over control of the FN factory complex, they continued production of the high power. A lot of places, when the Germans took over a factory, they would shut it down. They would use it to produce German small arms. There was a lot of production of Kar-98Ks, of German machine guns, that sort of thing. For example, when the Germans took over the French factories of Saint-Étienne and Châtellerault, they didn't continue producing French small arms for the German military. In this case, they're guns that don't use standard German ammunition. They're not really in the supply chain. Instead, they had those factories tool up to produce elements of German small arms instead. Well, with FN, you got high-power pistols that just fit right into German usage, so they kept on making them. And over the course of the war, both the design would be simplified, the time requirements, like the quotas for production, would be increased, the quality would decrease, resistance and sabotage on the part of the Belgian workers would increase over the course of the war. And so we see a steady decline in the quality of German high-power pistols over the course of the war. Now, let's get to the beginning here. The very first ones that are taken are just complete guns. Either they're completed guns like at the rack in FN ready to ship out, or they're guns that are actually confiscated from Belgian soldiers and officers. But they've gone through the full Belgian production and proofing process. On guns like that, the Germans didn't put any markings on at all. In fact, this is pretty much universal. When the Germans captured small arms, they generally, unless they were taken off a battlefield and needed to be repaired, they generally trusted the production factory's work. And so the only time you will see Waffenamts, which is like the German production inspection mark or approval mark, are when guns are overhauled or actually produced. So the very early Belgian pistols, they're captured by the Germans, they're reissued by the Germans, and there should be no German markings on them. If there are, in fact, basically, if you ever get a Belgian high power that has both Belgian proof marks and German proof marks on it, that's a gun that's been faked. And it's unfortunate because it was actually more rare and more interesting as a captured Belgian gun without any German markings than it is after fake German markings are added to it in an attempt to make it more valuable. So they start by just capturing guns. By July of 1940, they've gotten to the point where they're actually starting to get new output from the FN factory. And this begins with just assembling guns from completed parts. This is a modern production line. It's not like they build one pistol and then put it in the rack and then go start from scratch on the next pistol. This is mass production of all the parts all at once. Parts get warehoused into bins, and then your assembly team fabricates complete pistols from finished parts. And the Germans are able to do that. So the early pistols are assembled on pre-serialized Belgian parts with Belgian, they've gone through the Belgian proofing process. Maybe they haven't been finished, they haven't been blued yet. So some of these you will see a single German approval stamp, acceptance stamp, when they finish the production process. Some of them didn't need to go through any steps of actual final production. They just assembled and ready to go. Those won't have any German marks at all. Now, when the Germans do actually start new production and new serialization of their own, they start at serial number 50,000. And they do that because the Belgian contract had been somewhere in the guns that had been, the parts that had been finished were in the 44 and 45,000 serial number range for the Belgian army when the Germans took over. And as the Germans use up the already serialized parts and they need to start manufacturing their own parts, they want to avoid any serial number overlap. And so they just skip all the way to the end past all the 40,000s. They go straight to 50,000 and start there. So it is at 50,000 that you see new production German frames. And at this point, they're still basically the same guns that the Belgians use. So they have all the bells and whistles, they have stock slots, they have tangent sights. Very high quality still. It wouldn't be until December of 1940 that the first simplification happens. And that is when the Germans get rid of the stock slot. So I don't have an example here with a slot for a shoulder stock, but the Belgian army had adopted a shoulder stock with the pistol. The German army didn't have stocks, didn't see the point of them, didn't want them, didn't need them, and thus it was a really easy decision for them to simplify the production by just getting rid of that process entirely. It doesn't make anything more complicated. You're just taking the standard frame and not making a couple of extra cuts into the back of it. So they dropped that starting in December of 1940. Now, let's take a closer look and let me explain to you some of the details that exist early on and that change over time on these guns. What we have here is really a quite nice example of a 1942 production German occupation high power. We have a serial number here of 106,000. This is in that range that started at 50,000 when the Germans started their own new production in the fall of 1940. They'd made about 50,000 pistols within 2 years, which is not a terrible production, I suppose. The markings on the side of the slide here are the standard Belgian ones in French, Fabrique Nationale des Armes de Guerre, Herstal Belgique, but we have German inspection and proof marks. All right, this is about as close in as my camera will focus. You can see we have two. We have an eagle with a swastika there. That's like the final approval stamp. And then we have WAA 140 under a sort of stylized eagle. That's what's called a Waffenamt, because the WAA stands for Waffenamt, which is like the German weapons office. These are stamps that belong to specific individual inspectors. Each inspector has his own number, and they would go through 3 different inspectors who actually marked pistols at FN. So the very first ones will be 613. After that, there is a time period for a little while when you get 103, and then it transitions to 140. Now, all 3 of these guys are inspectors who were working in the FN plant, but they moved around from job to job as they reorganized the production line to try and make it more efficient. and they weren't always all actually stamping the guns. Sometimes they were doing inspection work that didn't involve stamps. So that's the deal with the different Waffenamts. And Anthony van der Linden's book explains exactly what serial numbers and what features to expect with the different numbers, which is a little more detail than I want to get into in this video, which is already getting long enough. At any rate, in 1942, the Germans are still putting 500-meter tangent sights on these pistols, which I think may be a bit surprising to some people. The production quality is still generally quite good. This is a nice looking pistol. We've got wood grips. We've got all the other features, everything except it doesn't have a cutout for a shoulder stock. That feature disappeared pretty darn early. At this point, they are also Waffenamping the magazines. So we got, that one's a little harder to read, but we got a Waffenamp stamp down at the base of that magazine. By December of 1942, things are starting to get a little worse for the Germans, and they start looking at really trying to up production quotas on these and simplify the guns. And it's at right about serial number 140,000, they finally get rid of the tangent sight, and they revert the design back to a sight like this, just a plain fixed rear sight, which is frankly what most high power contracts involved. You aren't actually going to be shooting this thing effectively at 500 meters. Even with a shoulder stock, you're not going to be really shooting that far. So they finally get rid of it. Production continues. The war doesn't really get any better for the Germans. Things start going downhill, but they just keep cranking away at high powers, at FN. They get their serial numbers up to about 210,000 by April of 1943, and then they make a decision to change the serial number regime to fit the same way that they do serial numbers on other German production guns, which is batches of 100,000 with a letter suffix. So this actually comes from very late in production. In May of 43, they restart the serial numbers at 1A. So the numbers go up to 210,000, and then they restart at 1. They go to 99999A, and then transition to 1B. Now you can see here, this is 53,000 and change B, a little cursive German B there. And for what it's worth, when they get to about 15,000 B, they start truncating all the secondary serial numbers. So you got the full number on the slide, and then they just go to the last 3 digits and the suffix for the other parts. That doesn't seem like something that would save them a whole lot of work, but they make that change regardless. Now, when they start adding that suffix, approximately late spring of 1943, they also go ahead and remove the mag safety feature from the pistol. So normally the high power has a mechanism so that you cannot fire it if the magazine's out of the gun. As part of the simplification process, the Germans get rid of that element, just so there are a couple extra parts that they don't have to manufacture or install. This particular gun is made, things are really getting pretty rough. So they have changed the grip panels from wood to bakelite because wood is getting hard to obtain. Interestingly, when they do the bakelite, they actually have to move the grip screw location just slightly. It's like a millimeter, but it's just enough that you actually cannot interchange the wood grips and the bakelite grips on the guns because the screw holes don't quite line up with the frames. By this time, there are real material shortages impacting production. Production starts to get a bit intermittent. It will continue until basically the very end of the war, August of 1944. Well, the very end of the war for Liège. But most of the production is done by May of 44. After May, they don't manage to get a whole lot built. And if we look at this, like the production quality is pretty rough. There are a lot of machine marks. There started to be more and more sabotage of the guns by the Belgian workers. And it's often, there are 2 forms of sabotage. One of them is not doing the heat treating or the very fine precision tolerancing properly, because that was really fairly difficult to detect. You know, it's easy if you just accidentally, quote unquote, drill a hole straight through the middle of the slide. Well, that's going to get noticed really fast. You're going to get in trouble, and that pistol is going to go in the scrap bin. But if you can mess up the locking block so the gun's not really safe to shoot, but it's subtle, that can be pretty hard to actually notice. So that was one form of sabotage. The other was actually producing pistols to a very high standard of fit and finish. And this is something that you will see. Some of the later production FN guns, you can have really rough examples like this interspersed in the serial number range with really nicely made ones. And the idea was, if one of the factory workers decides to spend a whole lot of time making one gun really nicely fitted and finished, well, that's a lot of time that he's not spending making more guns. So that was also a form of sabotage that was used by some of the forced labor employees at FN under German occupation. There you go. That, I think, is hopefully a good overview of what to expect from German occupation production Browning high powers. It's kind of funny, this occupation process, in a way, repeats itself, at least sort of as far as the pistols are concerned. When Allied forces liberate Liège in 1944, the factory, of course, stops making pistols for the Germans, but they once again are in this position of they've been manufacturing pistols. Production got slow, resources got scarce, etc., but there's still lots of parts around. And as soon as the Germans are gone and the Allied troops show up, a lot of the Belgian experts come back to FN. A lot of the old-time company people, the inspectors, not the base level factory workers, but the management, the overseers, the engineers, they come back because, well, they're Belgian patriots. They want to restart production at FN. They want to help rebuild Belgium as quickly as possible. And guys start putting pistols together for the Allied troops. There are, in fact, there are factory records kept of this. You could go into the factory as a soldier or an officer or pretty much anybody and buy yourself a pistol, and they'd put one together from the parts that were still available. So there is an early batch of liberation Browning high powers at FN that have sort of mix-matched parts, maybe some things that weren't actually blued or finished, weird serial numbers, no serial numbers, maybe inspector proofs, maybe not, certainly no Waffenamts anymore. And those go out to Allied soldiers. So kind of starts itself all over again. And of course, high power production would restart properly in a full professional, factory manner in the year or two after World War II. And there are a number of post-war contracts that FN is able to fulfill, selling those pistols to, well, Denmark, among others. Anyway, this has been quite the long video. Because this is an area with a lot of subtle detail to it. If you're interested in collecting these pistols, I would highly recommend picking up a copy of Anthony van der Linden's book, FN Browning Pistols. It's a fantastic, huge 2-volume book now, still in print, so it's still available at a reasonable price. And he goes into substantial detail about the exact variations to look for to make sure that you get a legitimate one of these and not a faked one. So thanks to Mr. van der Linden for that work. That was a huge help in putting together this video. Thanks also to Morpheus for giving me access to these couple. They actually have like 3 or 4 more beyond this that are mostly in this late war pattern. So if you're interested, check it out. Maybe there's one there that'll speak to you. Anyway, hopefully you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching.